Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we're in the home stretch. Thank you all for showing up and giving me your support here. As mentioned, here to talk to you about, you've heard a lot today about digital risk and the risk that's inherent in all of our digital transformation journeys. Well, as the Vice President of Identity Products and our Fraud and Risk Intelligence products, identity is certainly back on the front page when it comes to one of the most consequential risk factors when it comes to digital transformation. Today I'd like to talk to you about why that is, what's required to help sort of manage and mitigate some of these risks, and then some of the products that we have today to offer you to help actually solve some of those problems. So let's start with, what are some of the identity challenges that's contributing to this risk? And there's really three areas that have gotten identity back on the front page. The first is modernization. As organizations are moving more and more workloads to the cloud, applications are moving beyond the relatively safe perimeter of our castle walls of going outside the firewall. Our users are becoming more and more mobile. More and more of the workforce is now working on iPads, iPhones, remote offices, remote workforces, as well as third-party users. Third-party workforce is a big contributor to how we get work done. So this modernization has led to an explosion of the types of devices that are used to even interact, not just with our mobile technology that users are using to access resources, but more and more automation and IoT devices that are acting on by our behalf as we're sleeping even, and taking advantage of improving productivity with the expansion of IoT. So that's the modernization piece. Secondly, with this modernization becomes an expanded attack vector that's caused attackers to look at more and more ways to infiltrate our information or applications. So this has increased our malice in the world of identity. Gone are the days where in order to steal your data, I have to infiltrate behind your castle walls of the firewall, take over your devices, and steal your data through Trojans and malware. Now the best way to attack your data is to steal credentials and just walk through the front door pretending to be one of your legitimate users. Even now we're seeing the attack vector shift even more with strong authentication methods coming to fore. We're now seeing things like the attack surface moving to even forgotten password or credential reset mechanisms, not even just stealing credentials. So the attack surface has absolutely grown. The ways intruders can now steal your data is more sophisticated, but yet at the same time simpler. It's much easier for them just to walk through the front door. So we have to look at how we address this malice concern. And lastly, obviously, is mandates. Between new regulations with GDPR, improved focus on PCI and data sovereignty rules, protecting your identity and managing your identity has become even more difficult in this digitally transformed world. So what are some of the things that we need? What are the key ingredients that we need in order to solve this next generation of modern identity? The first is the solution needs to be convenient. Users will not tolerate friction in their access cycle. We have done a lot of friction creation over the last couple decades in identity. Every time that the risk of identity has increased, what have we done? We've made it even more difficult for end users. When we started to see passwords getting compromised in the front door, what did we do? We made passwords even more difficult. We made password composition rules that were just nightmarish in nature. We made users reset their passwords on a very frequent basis. All this did really was increase the friction on our end users. It made it harder to access stuff. Every time that we saw a new attack vector as users went mobile, we added more controls that added friction to the end user experience. We've got to reverse this trend and make it more convenient for users to gain access to the things they need to do their job. Next, it needs to be intelligence. We have to stop thinking about one more thing that we can make the users do. I also run our FRI organization, our Fraud and Risk Intelligence business, and there's lessons to be learned in how we protect consumers in credit card transactions. If you think about it, in the world of detecting fraud, and you have a card not present transaction, for example, there's a lot of potential for fraud when I don't have a credit card, whatever. The controls that we've put in place to prevent fraud are much more focused on the back end at how we look at transactions, how we detect bad transactions, and our focus is on making sure that we have the least amount of friction in that transaction as possible. In the world of identity, we've tended to put the burden on the end users when the threat increases. In fraud, we tend to put the emphasis on intelligence around transaction processing and transaction understanding so that we don't put the burden on the user. We have a lot to learn from how we detect fraud in financial transactions and apply that to identity. And lastly is the solution that we come up with for our modern identity landscape has to be pervasive, right? It has to work from cloud to ground. There's a lot of companies out there that may talk to you about a modern authentication solution or modern identity solutions, and they're great if you were just starting your company day one. If you had nothing yet and you were going to start day one and put everything in the cloud. But the reality is, that's not the luxury that we have. We cannot erase the whiteboard of our enterprise and start again. We have to, this transformation is going to be a journey to the cloud. So we've got to figure out how we support not only the new cloud assets and this transformation to the cloud, but how we don't create two different worlds for our end users, whether they're working on-prem or in the cloud. So again, the three things that are important for us to consider as we look to this new modern identity solution is that it's convenient, is that it's intelligent, and it's pervasive. And I'll walk you through some of the ways that we're dealing with that here at RSA. At RSA, we have two sets of products really focused on two different problems. Our first is around what we call identity assurance, the piece that you see on the right there. Identity assurance is the problem of dealing with, is a user who they claim to be? We solve those problems through our product called RSA Secure ID Access. I'll talk a little bit more about what makes that product up as well as the next in a few minutes. The second problem that we're looking to counter is around what we call access assurance. Now that we know who that user is confidently through identity assurance, do we understand what they have access to? Is their access appropriate once they get through the front door? So that's our access assurance product, and it's called RSA Identity Governance and Lifecycle. And we'll go through the details of that as well. Some of the key capabilities on the identity assurance side is to be able to have access control and single sign-on capabilities to make sure that we can connect users to the applications that they need, as well as obviously a breadth of authentication solutions, and I'll go a little bit more detail on that in a moment. On the access assurance side, it's really all about identity governance, making sure that we govern who has access to what in our enterprise. These are things like access certifications, automated rules, and intelligence around making sure people's access is appropriate in the enterprise. And finally, identity lifecycle. Once we determine that we need to grant people access or that we determine that access is not appropriate, how do we actually affect that change? How do we actually change somebody's access, have the right controls around how access is changed within the organization? So let's dive a little deeper into each one. When we look at RSA Secure ID Access, again, helping you with the problem of identity assurance. Is a user who they claim to be? There are 4 areas that we're invested in helping do that. You may all be familiar with RSA Secure ID, the hardware tokens, which were our hardware-based OTP, one-time passcode. But RSA Secure ID Access has gone well beyond the hardware token these days. We still sell millions and millions of hardware tokens every single year, but we've also modernized our approach to authentication with RSA Secure ID Access being a born-in-the-cloud SaaS offering for our customers. We still support on-prem deployments, but most of our new customers are actually deploying their authentication capabilities straight from the cloud. So in order to really provide this new modern authentication experience, it's these 4 areas we're focused on. First is around modern authentication. We need to support more than just hardware-based OTP. We also now support a full spectrum of authentication solutions that leverage a lot of the hardware that you have in your pocket every single day with mobile technology. We've had mobile OTP solutions actually for over 16 years now. Most people don't know that. And now we've gone beyond that to new advanced mobile authentication capabilities from biometrics to simply push notifications, as well as obviously our same OTP technology that we've had for a while. Other things that we support is now new standards that are advancing in the world of authentication, like FIDO. FIDO stands for Fast ID Online. The great thing about these new standards is that they provide a much easier way to integrate authentication solutions with applications. FIDO is simply a standard. It is not a new authenticator. It's not a replacement of a hardware token. It's not a replacement of any authenticator, really. It's a protocol. What it allows is that we can have standards-based authenticators with standards-based protocols to integrate with back-end systems. So you avoid things like proprietary agents, things like that. All of the new browsers support FIDO at this point, as well as operating systems like Windows Hello. So these standards are being built right into the platforms. And then what we'll see is the advancement of FIDO authenticators themselves. RSA Secure ID Access will be coming out with its own mobile FIDO authenticator. So our mobile authenticator will actually be a FIDO compliant mobile authenticator. And we already support FIDO authenticators that exist today. For example, like Yubico devices, YubiKeys, if you will. Likewise, this black ring on my hand is actually a FIDO2 authenticator. This is an authenticator that I can use along with Secure ID Access to gain access to my corporate resources. It just happens to be something I have. It's a physical ring, but it's also based on the technology of something I am. This has integrated biometrics in there that's monitoring my heart rate and monitoring my activity. So in connection with something I have, as well as something I am, my heart rate signature and my motion activity, I can actually use this along with gesture-based technology to authenticate to applications. Okay? It's as simple as that. It doesn't get more convenient, I suppose, than just going like this to authenticate these days. I look a little weird when I'm doing it, but it's pretty convenient. I don't have to remember any complicated passwords, et cetera. So I'm very excited about all the new modern authentication methods, everything from Face ID and Touch ID. Soon you'll be seeing technology in other smartphones with things like Palm ID. That actually uses special infrared cameras, not just to read your fingerprints, your palm prints, but also the vein patterns within your hand. So very cool technology coming to prove you are who you say you are. I always joke that someday we're gonna have like earlobe ID or something, that you take a picture of your ear or something. But there's a lot of advancements in this area. But the new modern sexy authenticators are not the only thing that you need to modernize your experience for users in this world. That's just one dimension. The other aspect that you need is this notion of intelligence. So I mentioned, modern authentication helps you modernize and make things convenient for users. But furthermore, we need an intelligence-based solution. So when we look at our next capabilities around intelligence or risk-based assurance, this is how we're using both conditional access that you see on the right, as well as AI and ML-based technologies, much like we use in our fraud portfolio to detect credit card transaction fraud. We're using these capabilities to monitor things like user behavior, known locations, et cetera, to really understand the risk associated with somebody accessing something. If I'm using my corporate-owned laptop, I happen to be in my office on the corporate network accessing an application that I access every single day, that common behavior pattern indicates that it's a very low risk that it's not me. So we can reduce the friction by adding a lot of this contextual-based information or even AI and ML-based intelligence into the equation so that we can actually reduce the amount of times that we're asking users to authenticate, whether that authentication is with a password, an RSA Secure ID token, or a motive ring like I'm wearing today. So that's another way in which we're increasing our security, but at the same time improving the convenience for end users. And the last area is really bridging what we call the islands of identity. As applications and users have moved outside of the relative safety of the corporate firewall, we're starting to create these islands of identity. So if you've moved workloads, for example, to cloud infrastructures like AWS or Azure, you're creating whole new identity ecosystems in these cloud infrastructures. Likewise, you have your own public and private cloud infrastructures or SaaS applications that you're using, You need a solution that is going to take that single source of identity that I am and allow me to go from island to island, application to application seamlessly, regardless of which cloud platform it's on, regardless of which identity infrastructure it's running on. So these are the 4 capabilities that we're focused on with RSA Secure ID Access to, again, help you prove users are who they claim to be. In terms of the areas of investment that we're looking at in RSA Secure ID Access, there are 4 areas. First is modern authentication. As I mentioned, this is an area where we're looking at how do we continue to modernize this aspect, not just of authentication, but also the areas around authenticators. So for example, just yesterday, my latest article came out in Security Week around, are we really going to a passwordless world or a less password world? And right now, we're really on a journey to a less password world. What do I mean by that? If you look at some of the technologies that are out there today that appear to be passwordless, like for example, let's take Face ID, for example, on your iPhone. Many people say, look, I've already got passwordless technology, I've got Face ID. No password there, I simply train it to know my face, it's a biometric, 1 in a million entropy, solved, problem solved. The reality is, though, how did you get that credential? How did you enroll in that Face ID? What happens when you forget, what happens when you lose your phone, for example? What you quickly find out is that a lot of these passwordless authentication methods are simply facades on top of the underlying password. So in reality, we haven't gotten rid of the password yet. Okay, so we have to actually, where we're working on, and we'll talk about this a little bit, some of the advancements we're making here, but we also have to look not just at new authentication methods, but all of the systems and processes around them for how we do credential enrollment and credential recovery when the credential that you have is lost or unusable anymore. The second area is on risk-based identity assurance. Now, we've talked about the risk engine a little bit, right, where we're using AI and machine learning, behavior analytics, and we've created this magical black box that assesses the risk of somebody accessing an application and saying, is this person really who they say they are? And when that risk is really high, we can do things like a step-up authentication, ask them to do something else. Again, same sort of concept that we use in our fraud detection and prevention products as well. But the issue that we've had with risk-based identity assurance is that it is a bit of a black box. So people look at it often and say, well, why is it assessing me as a high risk right now? What is it? So we're investing in technologies to actually provide, to open up that black box, to give visibility into how these AI and ML-based technologies are working. What is it finding? What attributes about you or about your experience is it determined to be risky so that we can properly mitigate those? We're investing in technologies where you can actually have the AI machine run side by side with your policy base to understand if you were to turn on the actual risk-based identity assurance capabilities, what the user's experiences, how that would be different, and how that would either increase, how much it could increase your security as well as reduce user friction. So the area of providing visibility into the black box of our risk-based engine is very important for us. Likewise, enterprise grade. So as we look at our enterprise grade area of investment, this is really all about making sure that you have the scale and the capabilities that you need as a large enterprise. So RSA Secure ID, one of the greatest things about it was its reliability. It has some of the highest customer satisfaction scores I've ever seen in my career. And the biggest thing with customers is that it just works. It's highly available, it's redundant, it's incredibly scalable. But as we move to the cloud, there's a lot more uncertainty. One of the risks that we face as a software vendor is how do we ensure that we can provide that same level of availability and performance when we're operating from the cloud? The reality is we've seen cloud outages. So when we look at enterprise grade, we are looking at, you may have connectivity outages. You may be in a spot where you don't have access to the internet. I get on a plane, I don't necessarily have access to the internet, but I still want to be able to access my applications on my device. Likewise, we need to work on if I want to log into my laptop and I'm in a place that I don't have Wi-Fi, or I have to log on my machine to even connect to Wi-Fi, I can't be dependent upon internet connectivity for that. So when we talk about enterprise grade, it's about scalability, it's about reliability, but it's also about the ability to have a choice of how I can authenticate myself in a secure way, even in a disconnected state. And lastly is to support the customer journey. We're all on our journey to the cloud with this digital transformation, and we need to help our customers. We have over 18,500 active Secure ID customers using our technology to make sure people are who they say they are. Largely, a lot of those customers are using that to protect things like VPN, privileged access, or on-premise applications and infrastructure. As they move to the cloud, we need to help them modernize their authentication while at the same time protecting all new types of applications in the cloud. So I'll give you an example of some of the things that we've done recently in this customer journey piece. For our existing customers, for example, we've created new capabilities with RSA Secure ID Access where you can use a lot of these new modern authentication capabilities like my Motive Ring, even with your existing VPNs that you deployed a decade ago. You may have deployed RSA Secure ID agents or Authentication Manager agents to those VPN infrastructures, again, a decade ago. Our new capabilities that we've introduced with Authentication Manager is that you can modernize that user's experience with even the VPN you deployed 10 years ago without any changes to the VPN or to the agents that you deployed to that VPN over a decade ago. So we're trying to make it as frictionless and painless for you as possible to modernize without having to, again, erase the whiteboard and start again for your identity strategy. Similarly, we're looking at how you can take a lot of the same processes that you use today maybe with RSA Secure ID and give a consistent user experience to users as they move to the cloud as well. So for example, how do I use my Secure ID token with things like my AWS environment or SaaS applications? At the same time, you can also modernize that experience. So we're giving users a choice of authentication as well, so that if they want to continue to use their RSA Secure ID token, have a blast. They want to switch to something like a FIDO device, a Motive Ring, a YubiKey device, or a mobile authenticator, you can offer them that choice. So it really increases the convenience as well as you transform. Let's switch gears a little bit on identity governance and the areas we're focused there. Some of the challenges that we're focused on with RSA Identity Governance and Lifecycle really are around making sure that as you're going through this digital transformation and a move to the cloud, is you've got to have full visibility and coverage. For the past decade or so, we've been focused on how we provide you visibility within your enterprise to who has access to what. We have customers that are governing over 3,000 applications within their enterprise to ensure that they understand who has access to what. That number is just exploding as users are moving to the cloud and leveraging SaaS-based applications as well as other collaboration type features like Slack, for example. These are important social and collaborative platforms that may not even be deployed by your IT organization or managed by your application teams. These are collaboration and enablement technologies that users are using. However, there's critical information being exchanged on these collaborative networks, right? My engineering team uses Slack. Actually, most of RSA uses Slack to communicate and collaborate. There's some pretty sensitive information on there. We use wikis and other collaboration platforms like Microsoft Office to share design information for the next product releases. This is all intellectual property that I can't afford to just give open access to anybody to. So a lot of these things we have to enable, even though they aren't applications in the old way we used to roll things out. So we need to make sure that we can provide you full visibility into all of these sort of dark corners from an IT perspective of the applications in your environment. From a governance gaps perspective, we need to make sure that we can provide you full capabilities on how to govern this access. It isn't just about what I call the Where's Waldo approach to access certification, where you shove a big list of entitlements in front of managers and say, here's all your employees and their access, tell me if there's anything wrong with this. We need to move towards a way that we can actually focus the governance capabilities on the things that don't make sense. We need to highlight those points of access that we think are most risky and we think don't make sense. So this helps us identify, make sure that we can actually focus our human decision making on the things that are most critical. We need to make sure that we continue as we evolve to satisfy the audit requirements here, right? Auditors are getting more sophisticated. Every time I talk to my customers, they go through an audit. They're raising the bar every single time. Just getting through their annual access certification is no longer good enough. You need to demonstrate controls that in between those access certifications that you are detecting and remediating bad access as it's given out, as it's detected. If you're not doing that, you're not passing your audit. These days, I'm hearing more and more from customers beyond even just access certifications and real-time detection of these things, but also now they're talking about segregations of duties violations. Segregations of duties are toxic combinations of access. If I can place a purchase order, I can't approve it, is one example. So the auditors are really turning up the heat, and we need to make sure that we're providing the capabilities over users' access that will satisfy that you are implementing the proper controls to make sure that people's access is appropriate. We continue to look at protecting high-risk applications of privileged access. For those of you that maybe have a privileged access management solution, the idea of what privileged access is evolving with digital transformation. No longer is it just these what we call God accounts, root access or Windows administrative accounts. They are now normal everyday user applications that have a high privileged entitlement. For example, you may have access to your corporate AWS account that allows you to create or destroy workloads in the cloud. That is a highly privileged entitlement. It's no longer a special account, but it is a very high privileged entitlement. So we have to go beyond just protecting these God accounts to now protecting very high privileged entitlements that your normal users may have as part of their profile. It's funny, I had a great conversation today with one of our customers around this next topic of business unit accountability for reviews. How do you reduce this, when I talk about the Where's Waldo of access certification, how do you reduce the business user fatigue that people have on, here comes the next access certification, or here comes the next policy violation I have to answer to, right? How do we turn that, as the customer said to me today, I've got to figure out how to turn that stick into a carrot. Right? How do we get the business engaged in making sure this access is right? Because at the end of the day, when we talk about users' access, the issue is the only people that know whether that user should have that access are the people that are closest to them in the work environment, the business folks themselves. Without their engagement, we can't effectively protect it. So we're always looking for ways to ease the burden, to ease the friction on the business users in this task of making sure people's access is appropriate. So some of the areas that we're focused on in our IGNL, Identity Governance and Lifecycle product line, is around access assurance. How do we evolve this? This is where we're actually taking a lot of the same machine learning intelligence approach to help spot the bad guy. Instead of this Where's Waldo approach of, here's a picture of all of you and where's Waldo, in looking for the bad access, we can use these intelligence-based capabilities to spot the things that stand out, that don't make sense in your enterprise. Examples like peer group analysis. Why is this the only developer in the organization that has access to a production application? That's strange. Why does this person in sales have access to financial systems that they shouldn't, right? So these are examples where we can spot the outliers. We can use machine learning analytics techniques to identify access that doesn't make sense, okay? Likewise, we can combine it with other sources of information, for example, like entitlement usage, to help identify whether or not a piece of access is appropriate. So it's really about how we simplify the burden of access assurance, putting in more proactive capabilities around detection of bad access and dealing with it up front rather than waiting for access certification. The business user experience, this is another big one. Again, in terms of easing that burden on the end users, on the business themselves in this task, we've got to simplify that experience. I invite you to see a preview of our new Admiral release coming out early next year, where we've enhanced the user experience. But most importantly, in the areas of access certification and policy violation remediation, we've dramatically improved the ease of use in this. So we can explain to the user what they're looking at, and more importantly, why they're looking at it. So for example, when they're looking at a piece of access, it's no longer just Jim has access to account X that has entitlement Y. It's, I need you to look at this because Jim has an entitlement to destroy workloads in AWS, and we don't think as a developer he should have access to that. Thoughts? So it makes it a more directed question than just, here's a bunch of entitlements, what do you think? It becomes a very targeted conversation with the business user to help them provide context to make a more informed decision about a user's access. Another example, why is this, just so you know, you have a developer that is the only one in my organization of 360 developers that has this access. Is that strange? Seems to be to us. Let's understand why that is, okay? So the business user experience should help provide a much more guided experience through the process to reduce that burden, to simplify the efforts, and to be more targeted and more effective at access governance. Similarly with making it easier, when we talk about make it easier, I talked about how we were making it easier for the business user, but we also make it easier for you to deploy and expand your deployments. Applications are coming on board faster and faster. Your workflow, business process requirements are evolving very quickly. So on the topic of make it easier, we're really focused on the product of how to evolve your solution very easily. How do you implement new business processes around onboarding users, around mover processes, organizational changes, or new policy controls you wanted to put into place with things like when you implement cloud technologies. Similarly, we want to make it easier for administrators to see what's going on in the platform. If there's performance issues, if there's a bunch of workflow jobs that are stuck or confused, helping you administratively manage an environment where I have some customers that are dealing with hundreds of thousands of access requests a month, and just even managing that those processes are going through the system effectively is a huge burden. So that's an area where we're looking at helping make it easier for our administrators. And finally, I thought I'd talk about some of the cool topics that we're working on in the identity teams with our customers. So we've actually created what we call our RSA Identity Innovation work streams. These are work streams that they're active forums that we have with our customers. Each one of these, we look to solicit customer inputs, customer involvement. If you're interested in any of these work streams, I'd love for you to reach out to me, and we'd be happy to talk to you about what it means to be part of this working group. These are live working groups. We have regular meetings with our customers to explore the areas, these three particular areas. The first is what we call kill the password. In the effort of getting rid of the password once and for all, there's a lot of work to do here. Again, there is such a misnomer in the enterprise today that passwordless environment means having passwordless authentication methods. That's only one piece of the puzzle. From credential enrollment to recovery, to integrating passwordless technologies into the desktop, into everything that we access and how we access it is very important. So there's a lot of what you see below here is just a list of what we call IRPs. These are sort of innovation concepts, rapid prototypings that we're doing. So we're actually developing some of these prototypes, showing them to our customers and saying, what do you think? Let's see how this would incorporate into your everyday. A great example of this is, it may not be up here now because we've already completed it. I'll give you a couple examples under kill the password. So one, which we already put into the product, was under this area, killing the password. We went through with our sister company VMware, VMware is actually a customer of ours, not just a sister company, but they use RSA Secure ID access to make sure people are who they claim to be. And one of the things that they wanted to do to protect their developer community was use FIDO devices. And in particular, YubiKey devices, okay? Now you say, wait, I thought they were using Secure ID, and why does that mean they're using hardware tokens? Well, they wanted to use YubiKey devices as a means to not only protect users, but also the machine itself. And these are FIDO devices, so they work with RSA Secure ID access. But the problem we needed to work with them on was actually on secure enrollment and recovery. So when an employee first shows up, how do I get them, especially for remote workers, how do I securely enroll them so I can give them a YubiKey device? Well, the old answer people say is, oh, just log in with your Active Directory username and credentials. Well, if I know your Active Directory username and credentials, if I could steal your password, why can't I have you send me a YubiKey device and I can now pretend to be a VMware developer? That's bad. Again, same problem as what I mentioned with Face ID. Very secure authentication method, but when you have a very insecure enrollment process, you're handing out those very strong credentials to the wrong people. Same thing, I've lost my YubiKey device. I forgot it in my car, and now I'm in India, and now I can't access anything. What do? You need these recovery mechanisms that don't rely upon yet a weaker credential. So I think it was about 6 months ago, in working with VMware on these, we created some innovation prototypes on how to do secure enrollment and recovery without a password. Right, so some great innovations that now make it into the product. We've got other ones that we're working on. Another great one that's listed down here, and we've demonstrated this before at RSA conference, et cetera, is account recovery using government-issued IDs. So for example, let's say you forgot your security token, you forgot your password. We could actually have you take out your passport, and using our mobile authenticator, could actually have you scan your passport, and we'll actually do your identity verification through either a passport or in the United States, a government-issued driver's license now that they're all digitized. So these are ways that we can rely upon other means of recovery than just what's your mother's maiden name. So those are just a couple examples. Second area of innovation is around eliminating identity threats. So the first one's really about user convenience, increasing security, but there's still these attackers coming in. So how do we eliminate some of these identity threats? So this is the area where we're talking about things like our risk engine visualization and tuning. So how can we provide you the information coming out of our AI and ML black box of risk-based authentication and show you the visualization that helps you tune your environment. Some other areas is what we call our pluggable threat modules, or we just released this back in February at RSA conference, an integration with our NetWitness platform called threat-aware authentication. So this is where we take incident information from your SOC, from RSA NetWitness, for example, and incorporate it into your authentication solution. So for example, RSA NetWitness, through its UEBA capabilities, could be monitoring bad user behavior, or through its endpoint capabilities, detect some endpoint anomaly, or through network forensics, identify some strange network patterns. That information about those incidents, those active incidents within NetWitness, come over to our product with RSA Secure ID access, and that threat information is made aware to us. So we can do things like, for example, if we detect that a machine may have been compromised, we can make sure that we may do a step-up authentication if we're seeing activity coming from that device, because there's a heightened sense of awareness that it may not be that person behind the keys of that keyboard. We wouldn't know that if it weren't for this additional information that is shared from us from the SOC environment. Happy to announce, I think it's this week it was announced, we've extended those capabilities to work with Microsoft as well in their Microsoft Intelligent Security Analytics platform, so their MISA platform. So we've partnered with Microsoft now, and essentially it does a couple of things. We're sharing information across our different intelligence stacks. So we're telling Microsoft about information that we have if you happen to be using Microsoft's risk engine, for example. We'll exchange information between our risk engine and theirs. Same thing. We also take signal from Microsoft to inform our environment. We're also doing the same thing with AWS, where we're, again, exchanging information to improve your awareness within our risk-based intelligence. And then finally, you can get there from here, accelerating your journey to the cloud. So this is where, again, we're looking at all the friction that you are all facing as you move on your journey to the cloud. How do we help you modernize your identity? You will have to adapt your identity and authentication controls as you move from again, relying upon controls that you may have inside of your firewall that now all of a sudden become much more compromised or risky as you move to the cloud. Great example is passwords, right? As soon as you go to the cloud and you're just using passwords, they become much more vulnerable. So this is, again, another conversation that we're having with customers, how to ease that transition into the modern generation. So those are just some of the areas that we're working on. Again, I invite you to reach out to us if you're willing to be part of these work streams. We do expect customers to show up, engage in the conversations. It's great because you're working with some of the best and brightest in your peer group. You're working with my RSA product team directly. We're showing you some innovations. There's some really cool stuff that we're developing. And I'll be honest with you, not all of it's home runs, but some of it we show you and people go, meh. Some of it's really some cool stuff, and like I said, makes it into the product very, very quickly. So if you're interested in being part of the conversation, definitely reach out to us. That's it for me for today. If you have any more questions about it, we do have the demo stations. I don't know when they're still open till, but take a look at RSA Identity Governance and Life Cycle for your needs around making sure people's access is appropriate, and RSA Secure ID Access to make sure that people are who they claim to be. Thank you.